Thank you to everyone for hopping on this morning's mentor webinar. My name is Tyler Ford. I'm joined by Ben Sterling on our team here. Really, the purpose of today's webinar is just to kind of catch everyone up to date on where we stand right now with the mentor program, now that you've hopefully met with your students and interacted with them at that initial December or January mandatory meeting. I want to talk a little bit about where you go from here in your work with students, some of the resources that you continue to have access to, some of the retooled resources that you'll now have access to. We also want to talk through kind of communication best practices and how you can proceed in your work with students. So again, thank you for joining. Just a couple quick housekeeping things that I want to cover here at the start. You are going to have access to both a chat box and a Q&A box during today's sessions. Everyone will be muted just for the sake of clarity so we can make sure we're able to get through the content of today's meeting. But if you do have questions, if you do have things you'd like us to answer, you can post those in the Q&A box. And Ben and myself will be monitoring those throughout today's session. We'll also have time at the end of the session today to answer some of those recurring questions that we've seen multiple times that we want to address for everyone in the crowd. So do know that you can interact with us and we'll be happy to get you answers to those questions. But really the first thing that I want to start with here today is by talking a little bit about one of the most important resources that you have available as a volunteer mentor, and that's tnAchieves Connect. If you've been monitoring your Monday emails over these past few weeks, you may have seen that there's some changes to Connect. There's some updates to the platform. And that's part of why we're having this webinar here today. We want to explain those changes and we want to explain how this newer kind of retooled version of Connect is going to serve as a much better asset for you in your work with students. So really the first thing that I'll share before I even show you the new version of tnAchieves Connect is kind of the why for this change. What we have found with the previous version of tnAchieves Connect is that as you were logging into it, as you were working to reach out to your students there, it was a super helpful platform for monitoring student updates, seeing where they stood as it relates to requirements, and kind of figuring out where they needed to go next in terms of staying eligible for the scholarship. But its communication tools just weren't doing as great of a job as we would have liked in terms of actually connecting you to your students, because student activation rates weren't quite where they needed to be. So what we've done is retooled the platform to make it easier for you to use as a volunteer, to put front and center some of the key information and some of the key deadline information that you need to track on your students. And this new retooled platform is going to put those things front and center to make it a whole lot easier for you to get information out to your students. So as a best practice, as guidance moving forward, what we're going to encourage every mentor to do is use that retooled version of tnAchieves Connect to always have access to cell phone numbers and email addresses for your students, and text and email your students as often as possible, as opposed to messaging them through that old version of tnAchieves Connect. What we've heard is you are much more likely to get a response from your students when you do text them. Even if you were to text them and say, hey, check your email, I'm sending you a notice there, they're much more likely to take action there than opposed to in the old messaging service that Connect provided. So we encourage you to use that information to be texting, emailing your students, and staying in touch with your students via those tools. We know they're much, much more likely to be responsive to. So I want to take a moment now to kind of walk through this new version of Connect and share with you kind of how it can be helpful. So I'll share my screen here, and hopefully what you see is the updated version of tnAchieves Connect. I want to talk through this really briefly. So what you're going to find here is that this is a constant and live look at what information we have available to you in our data system. And what I mean by that is every time you refresh or log in to tnAchieves Connect now, the information is going to be accurate as of that moment. It is constantly being refreshed. What you'll find here is that you've got access to your contact information. So if you've ever like to update it, you can simply type your email, type your phone number, and submit the form back to us, and you can update your contact information that way. You're also going to find that on this new Connect platform, we've got text templates that will update every other week to be timely with our communication best practices and to be timely to what your students need to be working towards in that moment. So those text templates will be a good resource for you to pull from and use in your text communication to students. You're also going to find we will update update scholarship deadlines and requirements as they're approaching. So right now, you'll see we're working towards some really big March 1st deadlines with your students, including the FAFSA deadline, completing that mandatory meeting requirement if they didn't attend in person. And then a little bit off in the horizon, we've got that community service deadline. But as these deadlines change, as they come and go, we will update this section so you can always see, again, in real time, what your students need to be making progress towards. But the final, and I think the most critical piece of this platform, is the student information. So what you will find when you log into your unique Connect page is that each of your students is going to have a section that looks a lot like this. So you're going to see that it's got the student's name, it's got their contact information, and it's got their high school and current college preference. Again, that current college preference is going to be updated in real time. So if the student were to update it with us, you'll see in real time that it's changing on the Connect platform. But I think the really valuable piece here in terms of student information is that student deadline and eligibility information section. Because what this will show you is whether or not the student is still eligible for Promise. It'll show you how many community service hours they've got in. It'll show you if they're up to date on their mandatory meeting requirement. And finally, it'll show you whether they have or have not filed their FAFSA. So when we talk about all of the critical deadlines and requirements that students need to stay up to date on, those are going to be reflected in this eligibility information section. You'll find parent information here for your students as well. This will repeat then for every student that you've got on your list. One of the nice things here is that it cuts out that step you had in the old Connect platform of having to visit each student's unique profile page, click in and out to find their information. Instead, now it's going to be listed all in one spot, all at one time, and you can access it really at any given moment to get the most accurate and up-to-date information on your students. So this is a change that we're really excited about. Honestly, I think it's going to make your life a whole lot more efficient and more effective as a mentor, because you're going to be able to text your students, you're going to be able to get in touch with them, hopefully, and you're going to be able to get them real-time information on what they need to be doing and how they can keep making progress towards not only Tennessee Promise eligibility, but also starting college in the fall. Before I talk just a little bit more about some additional resources we have available, Ben, do you have anything at all to add on this new Connect platform?
Not anything really additional to what you've already said. I just think this hopefully is well received in terms of the live look at student eligibility and the information that's provided. One thing that I will note that we had the question in the Q&A is how live is that FAFSA information that's portrayed on here? And you may have mentioned this, and I may be repeating it. I was typing some answers to some questions, but
great question.
If you haven't answered that already, we have a little bit of a delay in terms of, say a student submits their FAFSA today. We always like to say that we wait at least 72 hours. Sometimes it can be more during peak seasons for us to actually get that information on our end. So if you have a student that files a FAFSA tonight, it might be a couple of days before you see it in tnAchieves Connect. But that's the same delay that we would see on our end at tnAchieves as well. So that is the good thing about this portal, as opposed to the older version of Connect, is that this is live. This is what we would see if you were to email me today and ask me about this particular student. I would tell you what you would see on Connect. So I think there's a lot of value add there. Also got a question for what's the URL for this page. Because this is built out as sort of a internal portal with tnAchieves, there's not just a URL that you would type in to go visit this. If you're going to go to an email from us, we've sent you your unique link to access the portal. We can also provide a URL on our website that you could log in, but the easiest way to access your portal is to just go to the link that's in the emails from tnAchieves every week in your Monday email. There's a unique URL that would take you directly to your portal. And that's my advice on the best way to access this.
That's exactly right, Ben. And I would add too, we do have under the mentor section of our website, if you hover over that tab, there's going to be a link you can use there to log into this new portal. So you can access it that way. But as a best practice, what I would recommend is if you've got that old Connect page bookmarked or saved, replace that with this link that you find in your Monday email, because moving forward, this will be the primary tool we're using to communicate student updates and student information to you. Ben, any other questions or anything on Connect that we should cut our kind of answer before we move into the next section?
No, I think we've covered everything that's really pressing here in the chat.
Great, fantastic. Well, before we address, and Ben and I are going to take just a few moments during today's webinar to talk about kind of some best practices or misconceptions that we may have moving forward. But I do want to highlight a few resources that you have available in your mentor handbook, because we're at a really critical point for your work as a mentor, but also for your students in general. Because now that we've had that initial mandatory meeting, really the next few months are going to be all about completing some really big requirements for Tennessee Promise, but also about making some important progress towards starting college next fall. So I wanted to refer you to a couple pages and resources that you have in the mentor handbook that I think can help you over these next few months. First page that I want to highlight here is the program's milestones page. This is going to be on page number 4 of your mentor handbook. And I highlight this page because we're going to be sending you those Monday emails with goals and objectives to be working towards with your students. But I recommend that every mentor keep this handy and keep this convenient in their work as a mentor, because this is going to outline all of the big targets that we're working towards with your students. So you'll see March 1st is our next big deadline where we're working to get students to file their FAFSA by. But then from there, we'll have deadlines for you in April, June, July that you can constantly be working on with your students and constantly be making progress towards. And I would stress too that we will outline and add information into tnAchieves Connect that helps you to help your students stay on track with these milestones. So I like to stress this page because I think that mentor handbook continues to be really, really valuable resource in your work as a mentor, because it not only outlines some of these big milestones, but it also provides some in-depth information related to key requirements. And one of those key requirements is the FAFSA. As you are working with students on the FAFSA, the handbook will have step-by-step guides on how students file the FAFSA. And I mention this because it is a big deadline for your students. It's one of those mandatory deadlines they need to meet to stay eligible. But as a mentor, we do not expect you to go line by line and sit down with your students and help them file the actual FAFSA. That is not our expectation. We know that the FAFSA contains a lot of personal information that students may not want to disclose, and we wouldn't expect you to get into the weeds on. But I do want to mention this page and the following page as well, which is FAFSA facts or kind of FAQs, because if your students should reach out with questions, if they should have concerns related to their FAFSA, this page can serve as a really great resource for you in terms of making sure that they're on the right track, they're getting that FAFSA filed. And again, they have the resources and information necessary to be successful in the FAFSA filing space. But I would mention too, that it is never our expectation that you know everything or have all of the answers as it relates to FAFSA. So if our team can ever be helpful to you or your student, let Ben, let myself know, and we are happy to help your student. We are happy to answer those questions. Again, I want to stress, we do not expect you to be filing the FAFSA alongside your students, but I did want to highlight this as a resource because I think it's really valuable. And I think it can offer some great answers and some great supports to you and your students when they're filing the FAFSA. But please do let us know if we can ever be helpful in the FAFSA filing space, because that's what we're here for. And we want to help you and your students as much as we possibly can. So these are just a couple of resources in your handbook that I think you want to leverage in the months and weeks ahead in your work with students. A final page that I'll make a quick note on is the suggested communication page. We're going to be updating the Connect portal with templates as the year goes on. But if you ever need guidance, if you ever need information on what you can be sending to your students that's timely, that's relevant, this suggested communication page on page 13 of your mentor handbook is going to have really great templates that you can use to customize, personalize, and make your own, but ultimately get important information out to your students in a timely manner. So again, just as a really kind of big point of this section, you want to leverage that mentor handbook and you want to keep it close by. Know that we've got this available as a PDF copy on our website. So if you ever need to refer to it, if you ever need to search through it, that mentor handbook can be a really valuable resource and asset to you in your work with students. Ben, any thoughts or additions on the mentor handbook front?
Not particularly with the mentor handbook, but I do have a couple of things regarding Connect. If you want me to hold those until the end, you may go ahead and address a couple of those now.
Why don't we come back to those at the end when we kind of do a broader Q&A section? Okay. I think that's good. But one final thing that I want to mention before we dive into some of these kind of FAQs that we've been getting is mentor hours. So we've teased these out a little bit in the training, but I wanted to highlight them because we're about to kick them off again for 2023. So you can expect to hear more about mentor hours in your upcoming Monday email. This is really an open office hours style session for you to engage with me, Ben, our team at large. It's going to be about a half hour per session. And truly, we don't have any proactive content planned for these sections. But what we do have is an open forum where you can come in, listen to other mentors, hear what questions they're asking, hear what may be working or not working from them, and you can get real-time answers from our team. I think I speak for the entire kind of outreach team on Tennessee Achieves when I say the mentor hours sessions are one of our favorite things to do, just because they are a great open forum to engage with you as mentors, answer your questions, and make sure that you're on the right track. So monitor your upcoming Monday email for that information, because we're going to get you information on how to join those mentor hours. And we hope you can join us for at least a few of these, because they really are a great opportunity to get to know other mentors and get to know our team in a broader sense. So really excited now to kind of make a pivot and start addressing some frequently asked questions or some kind of common myths we see from mentors. And then we'll save some time here in just a few moments for your questions. But Ben, if you want to kind of hop in here and share with us some of those misconceptions, some of those myths. I think that as we continue our work with students and as we continue serving the class of 2023, addressing these is really, really important to help define success for you as a mentor and make sure you're on the right track.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot that we've already kind of had in the chat. It's a pretty lively group today, and a lot of the misconceptions that we've laid out are some of those things that we're seeing that are maybe concerns in the chat and in the Q&A. So the first one of those been referenced many times already in the chat, and it's this sort of idea that because you're not hearing from a student that they don't want to work with you, or that they're not interested in the scholarship, or I think the way that you may want to say it is, my students haven't responded to me or my messages, and that they're not interested in working with a mentor. And Tyler, do you want to maybe say a couple of words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is one of the misconceptions we see most often. And I think it's a fair kind of line of thought. But what I would say is, what we see in many cases is that particularly, and I would say we're still particularly early on, students don't realize what they don't know yet. They don't realize they have questions, and maybe they've only barely dipped their toes into kind of the college going waters, right? They might not have started an application to a community college yet. They might not have started figuring out where they want to go yet. And that's okay. But what I would encourage every mentor to keep in perspective is every student kind of comes to this on their own time. And that's where the persistence and the consistency of you as a mentor comes into play. We ask that every mentor reach out to every one of their students on a biweekly basis, because in many cases, we see that students take the bait, for lack of a better word, in the spring, in March and April, as they start making key moves towards going to college. And at that point, a light kind of clicks on and they think, oh, shoot, I've been hearing from my mentor, Ben, for months. They've offered me help on this, and I've got some questions now. I'm going to take advantage of that. I think this can kind of take some time in some cases, and that's why we encourage you and ask you to remain persistent, because many students will come to you for help and support later on in the spring. They just don't quite know what they don't know at this time. I would add too, texting is really important in this space. We will always recommend that you text your students as your most consistent means of communication, because at the end of the day, they're just much more likely to ultimately respond and ask questions via text.
Yeah, I think that's good, and it's addressing a lot of the concerns that I've seen in the chat and so on. I was going to see if there's any additional kind of reaction to your answer there. Yeah, I think just to reiterate Tyler's point, if you have students that are less than communicative with you, from my experience in this, it's typically because they just have a plan that's outside of the scope of Tennessee Promise. And it has been communicated to them, through many different avenues, whether that be their school counselor or communication from us, that this mentor is associated with the Tennessee Promise, and that, as a mentor, if they're not planning on pursuing Tennessee Promise at an eligible institution, and then there's just no real reason to work with a mentor. While we know that's not true and really shouldn't be the perspective at all, I think sometimes it gets communicated that way. So it can be a little bit harder to reach those students. Okay, so the next misconception would be only a few of my students attended the mandatory meeting. The rest are now ineligible, and can I stop reaching out to them? And before you answer, I want to kind of add a little bit to that, because there's been quite a few questions about this one as well already in the Q&A, and it's this idea of students not attending the meeting, and like, what is their status now? Where are we? Is there anything that I should be saying to them, and what's kind of my next step as a mentor if my students weren't there?
Yeah, that's exactly what this question is kind of getting to the heart of, right? If you didn't see a student at that meeting, what do you do with them now? I would refer you to tnAchieves Connect first and foremost, because that's going to show you which of your students we've got as marked at their meeting and which students have completed an excuse form. Now, those students who did not attend the meeting are not ineligible or kind of out of it quite yet. Those students have through February actually to complete an excuse form to our team and then view a makeup webinar. So that's why if you were a mentor to us with us, prior to 2020, you haven't necessarily gotten an email yet that says these students aren't eligible, stop reaching out to these students. It's because, quite honestly, even if a student wasn't at the meeting, you should keep reaching out to them and keep nudging them to do that excuse form and do that makeup webinar, because they'll have that opportunity through February to essentially maintain their eligibility. So continue to reach out to those students, continue to offer them guidance, because it's certainly not too late for them. And then in March, after we complete that mandatory makeup webinar deadline for students who weren't there, we will absolutely send you an updated student list email. We'll let you know which students did follow through, did not follow through. And at that point, you will be able to stop proactively reaching out to those students who didn't go through that makeup process. But until then, keep nudging them, keep encouraging them, because they've got that makeup opportunity still.
All right, cool. Yeah, I think we also received a couple of questions specifically about eligibility, and you may have just addressed this. Sorry, I'm kind of doing both here. This idea that because a student didn't attend, they're not just immediately ineligible and have just immediately lost their eligibility. Students will remain eligible in our system all the way through, like Tyler said, through that March 1st. And then that would be when the ineligibility would occur, would be after the opportunity to watch the webinar has passed. So any students that didn't attend your meeting that wish to maintain eligibility for Tennessee Promise, they would need to submit that excuse form to then get access to the webinar. But know that not all students that didn't attend the meeting are in this boat and want to maintain Tennessee Promise eligibility. There's the reality that there were students that applied for Tennessee Promise in the fall, and they've now decided that they're going to go to an ineligible institution and didn't attend the meeting because they didn't want to use the scholarship. And that's the reality for some students.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Ben. I don't want to create the impression that all students are going to go through this process, right? This is kind of a natural attrition point where some students will make the decision that this just isn't for them. And that's okay. It's never been our expectation that if you've got 7 students, all 7 of them are going to stay eligible and stay engaged the entire time. You will get some who fall off over time, and that is totally and completely okay. It's our hope that you can continue working with those who are engaged, are meeting deadlines, and are really planning to leverage this scholarship and your support as a mentor.
All right, so the third misconception: I message my students on tnAchieves Connect. I don't need to try texting or emailing my students outside of the platform.
Yeah, this is a common misconception we're seeing right now. And I think that's a fair, again, kind of line of thought for you to have as a mentor. That communication platform worked really, really well for our mentors, especially when we were in an entirely virtual environment. When we were in 2021, 2022, when mentoring and all of our meetings with students were done via webinar or via tnAchieves Connect. What we have found, though, is as we've shifted into an in-person format again, as we've asked students to meet in person and to meet you in person, students are just not as engaged on that virtual platform as they were in the past. So this is why our updated guidance to you as a mentor is to text your students. I would not reach out to them on the Connect communication tools. As a matter of fact, the new Connect model that we've sent out to you, we've introduced here today, doesn't have any communication tools. And that's very intentional, because at the end of the day, texting is going to be your best friend. And I would say that goes for your students and their parents. Text your students, text their parents, and use that as your primary means of communication. And if you have only reached out to them on those Connect communication tools, I would recommend pivoting away from those tools and using text as your new mode of communication, because I do think you're much more likely to see student engagement and see student responses.
Awesome. Yeah, we've received several questions in the chat and over here in the Q&A around asking if they could send text messages through Connect Now and how that would look. And so, again, to reiterate what Tyler said, the new platform is sort of intentionally set up to not be a communication method. This is a portal for information, and then you're to use your own phone or email address, your own communication method to reach your students by using the information provided in Connect. There was a question on asking us to walk them through how to send a text message through tnAchieves Connect Now. It would just be simply go log into the link that we send you, look at the portal that Tyler had on the screen, go to each student that you see in there, their mobile phone number is listed. You would simply just type that into your phone and send them a message. So it's about as simple of a process as we could provide it now in terms of user friendliness.
Yeah, and just as a few kind of tips, because I know I've heard from mentors in the past that, there was a convenience factor to having all your students there and not having to enter their email addresses or phone numbers. And I definitely hear that. Just a few quick things that you can do to create a new efficiency for this new process. You can create one email thread with all of your students and then just reply all to that thread over time. So the messages are all right there, the email addresses are all right there, and you're still keeping things in one central hub. And you can do the same thing for text messaging as well. We do generally advise that you personally text your students whenever possible, but if you're ever sending out like big group reminders in advance of deadlines, if you're ever trying to get across one simple message, you can always group text your students. And I would advise to save their numbers in your phone. So enter them as, first name tnAchieves, last name Ben. So you can just search tnAchieves in your contacts and all of your students are right there, which will save you time, save you effort moving forward. There are definitely some kind of tips and tricks you can take to make communicating with your students via phone and email a little bit quicker.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think that's good. All right, so the fourth misconception, and I just saved a question to answer later here on the chat, but is my students are enrolling at institutions that aren't Tennessee Promise eligible. They don't need to bother keeping up with requirements. And then to add to that would be, and then that tnAchieves doesn't stand to help them, or what can tnAchieves even offer a student that's in that space?
Yeah, so with these students, what I always advise our mentors to do is still stay up to date with them and still encourage them to maintain their promise eligibility. And there's a couple simple reasons for this. First and foremost, quite honestly, particularly if they've already done the mandatory meeting, if they attended there, they've only got a few more simple things to do to stay eligible, right? File their FAFSA, which they already should be doing by March 1st, and then do 8 hours of community service. So it's not too much extra work for a student to stay eligible for promise if they've already attended that meeting. But also, if a student stays eligible, they essentially have a backup plan or a college insurance plan should anything change in the summer. Staying eligible essentially buys them through August, through the time they start in an ineligible institution, to fall back on Tennessee Promise. And what we see every year is that this does happen for students, right? They have every intention, every plan of going to a 4-year institution that doesn't accept Tennessee Promise. Maybe they've got plans to go out of state. Whatever it may be, Tennessee Promise isn't part of their plans. But they get to June, they get to July, and something happens at home that causes them to want to stay closer to home. Maybe they get a change of jobs. Maybe something happens in the family. Whatever it may be, life can happen. And a student will come to us and they say, hey, I want to use Promise now. And if a student doesn't stay up to date with these requirements, they can't fall back on the scholarship. So that's why we encourage you as a mentor to encourage every student to meet these deadlines and stay eligible, because you never know when those plans may change. You never know when something may happen. And this can serve as a really great insurance policy for those students who may in the summer change their mind. It does happen from time to time. And I should stress too, those students can only stay eligible through the point at which they start in an ineligible institution, but that's an additional 7 or 8 months of eligibility that they've got right there. So we always encourage students to take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I would address that. And I think the question of how does tnAchieves help them if they're planning on going to an ineligible institution, I don't think that the value of our communication could be overstated, even for that student. All of the information that we craft between now and that student's eventual college enrollment in the fall is designed to help students make the transition from high school to college successfully, not just to a Tennessee Promise institution, right? All of our FAFSA resources, FAFSA communication, all of that could be helpful for a student that's attending any college.
That's right. I mean, at our core, we are an organization, and our mentoring program is designed to help more students access college. We want to help them leverage Tennessee Promise, but at the end of the day, if we're helping a student get to a four-year college, you can help them do that as a mentor. Our team is happy to help them do that. We just want to help them be successful in that space, and you can do the same thing as a mentor.
Yeah, awesome. So kind of up against time, so let's kind of keep it quickly here.
Yeah.
The fifth misconception would be the FAFSA deadline's fast approaching, and I need to be available to individually file the FAFSA with my students.
Again, we touched on this earlier, so I'll be quick. That is not our expectation. We don't expect you to get into those weeds with the students. We've got those resources available to you in the handbook on our website, but know that our team, high school counseling teams, college staffs, they're always happy to help a student file the FAFSA. So let us know how we can help. We do not expect you to sit down line by line and file the FAFSA alongside your student.
All right. So now I think since we have we promised this would be 30 minutes. We're right at 30 minutes.
Yep.
For those of you that need to go and have only allotted 30 minutes for this, feel free to go ahead and hop off. We're gonna go ahead and move into sort of a Q&A for 5 minutes or so to answer some of these more commonly asked questions that are in the chat. And also, if you've asked questions in the chat or the Q&A and I have not answered your question yet, and you want to get that answered, just stay on. I will answer all of them, even after we end the broadcast. So you can stay on the Zoom and I'll answer those questions until we get them all wrapped up. We're somewhere around 60 questions that have been asked. So I'm going to get to them. So just give me a minute and I'll get to your answers, especially if they're not something that's more of a Q&A. But I'm going to go ahead and run through these real quickly. But again, if you need to hop off, feel free to do that if you need to go. One question that came up a couple of times, and Tyler, I'll just go ahead and answer this one, is that what is the source of the data that populates in this new Connect? This is data that tnAchieves has. It pulls directly from our CRM in our Salesforce platform. So this is the data that I would be referencing or referring to if you ask me a question via an email. I would be looking at the same thing that you're going to see in your new tnAchieves Connect. This isn't student submitted. This isn't user submitted. This is based on, if you see that a student's attended their meeting, that's not something that they reported to us. We recorded their attendance at the meeting. Hopefully that answers that question. I had a question about guidance around military dependents when they live. Is there any guidance you may provide regarding military dependents when they live and graduate from a high school out of state, but their home state is in Tennessee? You want to take that one, Tyler, or you want me to?
Repeat the question to me.
So what guidance do you have around a student that lives and graduates from a high school that's out of Tennessee because they're military dependent, their home state is in Tennessee?
Oh, do you mind to take that one?
Honestly, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
So whoever asked that question, if you could shoot us an email at mentors@tnAchieves.org, we can definitely get you an answer to that question. I believe my understanding is that you qualify for in-state aid if you are a Tennessee resident and you're away on military assignment. Your Tennessee residency would still qualify, but I want to be sure on that. So shoot me an email and we'll definitely get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, please do email that one. We can get an answer for you on that one for sure.
This is a good question. So when they see their student college preference section on tnAchieves Connect, is that updated based on the submission of the student's FAFSA? Where does that data come from?
That's currently coming from FAFSA data because that's the most accurate and currently up-to-date data we've got on the student. Now, we will shift that at some point to information in their TSAC student portal, but it'll be kind of the data we're pushing to the student and asking them to confirm. It'll always be in check with that, in line with that.
So a couple of questions here. Should I wait for tnAchieves to plan our next in-person meeting with their students?
It's a great question. So a couple of things here. I think you can start planning another in-person meeting with your students if you prefer to meet with them sooner rather than later. We will, and I just saw this question posted to the side. We're currently ironing out the final details for our tnAchieves open houses, which are an optional meeting on your end as a mentor, but it's an opportunity to connect with your students again in a slightly more laid-back environment. Those will take place in early April. So we will have another opportunity hosted by tnAchieves to meet with your students, but if you want to meet with them again, go ahead and do that. Schedule a coffee, a time to grab a coffee with them, whatever it may be. Feel free to schedule another meeting even before that April open house.
Real quickly, I think this one was easy. There was another question here about why haven't my students activated their Connect profile and what should I do about that? So we have made a full transition, just to be completely clear on this, we've made a full transition to a different Connect platform that no longer requires any form of activation for any user. That the Connect platform now that we will use is more of a portal that is used. You log straight into that with the link that we send to you. There's no activation necessary. There's no personalization that's occurring here. It is literally just a live look into the tnAchieves system to see the information on your students. And then for those students that you may be wondering about, should they activate their Connect profile, the answer would just be no. They don't need to do that anymore. We've made sort of a shift, a change. What I used the term yesterday, the script changed a little bit as far as how we're approaching the Connect piece of this, to make it as easy for you as a mentor to use and gain the information that you need. We heard from mentors that said they're using Connect mostly just to gain access to their students' eligibility information and contact information. And we're like, we have a better solution for that. So here it is. So hopefully it is helpful for you in that way.
I'm seeing some mentors in the chat who are happy with that change. So I think, yeah, hopefully you find it to be a little bit easier, the lack of need for students to activate.
Yeah. Okay. Just a lot of questions in here. I don't know that we want to answer them all live on the broadcast, so that we can definitely make room for everyone here. I think we've answered most of the ones that I'm seeing here. But again, if you have a question in the chat that I've yet to answer, just stay on. You don't have to. We're not going to say anything. We're going to log off here shortly. But you can just go ahead and stay on the Zoom, and I will make sure that all of the questions are answered and addressed before you log off. So, Tyler, I really appreciate you doing this. Before we get off of here, I did want to make or at least celebrate a little bit that it's National School Counselors Week. Hopefully there's a couple of school counselors on here, probably are. They are absolute critical partners in this work for us. We could not do what we do. We wouldn't be where we are today. tnAchieves and Tennessee Promise would not be what it is today if it wasn't for the support of school counselors. So just wanted to say thank you to any school counselors that are on here, or if you're a spouse of a school counselor or a friend of a school counselor, this is their week to celebrate them. So thank you to all of them that constantly do all of the kind of the legwork for us on the front end for Tennessee Promise.
Yeah, absolutely. I echo that, and thank everyone for hopping on today, and thank everyone who attended their mandatory meeting these past few months. It was great to be back in person and to see all of our mentors and students together again. So we appreciate your efforts over these past few months to connect with students, and we're excited and eager to continue working with you in the months ahead. So reach out to us at mentors@tnAchieves if we can answer any questions or provide any assistance. But thank you for joining us today.